Well, guys, I'm about to cover something that has never been covered ever before. Like, never. So let's get to it. Now, I know what you're going to say. Oh, but frustrated atheist. Suris did this not too long ago. Aren't you just copying him?
Okay, today we're going to talk about the one question that all atheists fear.
Run away! Run away! Run away! Run away!
Or at the very least, they really hate to try and answer this question.
I love how you correct yourself and still manage to get it wrong.
I've been debating, going back and forth with atheists for just over a year now, and sometimes I feel like catnip, and I feel like they think they're the cat. They see a Christian and they want to pounce on me and play, and just like they do with everybody else.
For asking questions in a debate? I mean, I can understand if it's like gotcha questions, not like theists do those at all, ever.
And they always pose this question, and the question is, give me the evidence that Christianity is true, that Jesus is God, things of that nature.
Which is an understandable question. I can't speak for all atheists, but me personally, I'm not going to just take something based on faith. I need proper evidence.
So, thinking they're honest, I'm going to go down the evidence, and I'll cite the scientific evidence, the historical evidence, the archaeological evidence, third-party evidence, fulfilled prophetic evidence, statistical probabilities. I'll cite the eyewitness accounts of over 500 people that saw the events. 25,000 pieces of parchments and documents that are original and show that the text has never been altered.
Well, that was a lot to digest. Now let's take his points and go at them one at a time. So, he has scientific evidence, historical, archaeological, third-party, fulfilled prophecy, statistical probabilities, 500 eyewitnesses, and 25,000 pieces of document. Now, I don't know what kind of scientific evidence you have, and I'm not going to strawman you, so I'm just not even going to worry about this one. As for historical evidence, I'm not exactly sure what you mean. Is it historical because they actually do cite places that exist and people that existed? Because if so, then every work of fiction that's based in the real world then must be true. For instance, Harry Potter is based in 1980s England. Does that mean that Harry Potter is real because there is an England and there's a King's Cross station that they go to? Archaeological evidence has also been thoroughly covered, but I'll leave links in the description for anyone who wants to look into it if they haven't already. When it comes to the fulfilled prophecies bit, I think Sir said it best when he said this.
As far as prophecies go, the only prophecies I can tell that have actually come true within the Bible are prophecies that come true within the Bible. The only prophecies that have ever come true in reality are ones that have been so vague that literally 1,000 different circumstances could have been different and the prophecy could still be considered true.
As far as the documents part goes, Prophet Azad covered it, and he said it best when he said this.
This tiny little thing is counted among the portions of manuscripts Vodi and others refer to. Just look at this thing. Do you think it does anything whatsoever to verify stories in the Bible? I kinda doubt it. And fragments like this make up more of the manuscript count the earlier we go back in the body of New Testament texts. But steering away from that entirely, I'd like to briefly explain what's meant when we talk about a manuscript to begin with. Basically, a manuscript is any document that was written by hand. That's all. Thus, a Greek manuscript of the New Testament, while it sounds super duper important, is literally anything handwritten in Greek during a time that extends to the 16th century. The 16th century! For point of reference, many of the copies were produced after Christopher Columbus sailed to the Americas. Yet they're included in an account of manuscripts just because they happen to have been produced before wide-scale printing and were thus written by hand.
So we can go ahead and do away with those. As far as statistical probabilities go, men who are a lot smarter than I am have already covered this. So I'm going to leave a link in the description below for it. And I'm also going to leave a link for all the evidence against everything he's brought forth today as well. So that just leaves these two, both of which are covered by the mythicist position. Now the only mythicist I know is Godless Engineer, so go ahead and take it away, GE.
Thank you, Frustrated Atheist. I appreciate you allowing me to be here on your channel to explain my position on mythicism and kind of give you a brief overview of the apologetics used against mythicists and for historicity. First off, one of the things that really compels me to believe that Jesus didn't exist in history, or more accurately, that he probably didn't exist in history, is the fact that our first source for this Jesus figure was Paul. In Paul's letters, he vehemently states that he gets his information from no person here on earth. That in fact it was through the scriptures and through visions in which he got his information about Jesus. To include who Jesus appeared to, as well as the Last Supper and the creed that he was taught or whatever. Like, all of those things came through visions to him, revealed by the risen Christ. This is why Paul doesn't really elaborate on his family life or any of his ministry here on earth. Paul doesn't mention anything that actually happened before his crucifixion. So with Paul being our first introduction to this Jesus character, and then you fast forward about 20 years to the Gospel of Mark, who Matthew and Luke actually directly copy. So when they say that they have a lot of different sources for Jesus, they really only have a few in the Bible, namely Paul and Mark. And then, you have John, the Gospel of John, who just is kind of just another crazy Jesus cult at the time, but they were popular enough to get their own book in the Bible. But with Mark, you don't have any mention of Jesus' childhood, his birth, or anything like that. Jesus' journey starts when he's baptized and he's inhabited by the Holy Spirit, or rather the Messiah figure that's pre-existent in Jewish theology. If you didn't know that, that is actually part of Jewish theology. And it's most exemplified in the New Testament by the Gospel of John. Because the Gospel of John reveals that Jesus was with God when the earth was created, and that he, Jesus, is the agent of creation. So with the idea that this Messiah figure is a pre-existent being and that he just inhabited this poor Judean or Nazarene, whatever, this guy's body, it kind of seems to me like the Messiah figure and Jesus himself are just mythical figures that are set up to tell a story about this new religion, being Christianity. Even if you examine the word Christianity, it doesn't really mention Jesus. I mean, sure, Jesus is the person that they consider to be the Messiah, but Christianity at its roots is really just about the Messiah of the Jewish faith. It's an extension of the Jewish faith. So you have these particular things that really set up for a mythical Christ. Now, you not only have an embellishment of Jesus' story as it goes through the Gospels, but also the Gospels don't offer really any kind of historical information at all. I mean, sure, they get some names right or whatnot, but I think that that's more to be a compelling story rather than just obviously made up bullshit. So a lot of apologists will use the Gospels in order to prove that Jesus actually existed by claiming that they are historical documents and they provide historical information, in which they actually don't. But then once you challenge them on the Bible and try to state how it's kind of circular reasoning, being that the Bible, or rather the books composed within it, are just the claims that Jesus existed, or the claims that Jesus did this, that, and the other miracle. Well, if you try to call circular logic on them, then they have another card to pull, and that's extra biblical sources. A lot of times they'll pull out Josephus, who was writing in the 1st century. And the problem with Josephus is that the Testimonium Flavianum is actually inserted much later. And we know this because of the fact that this particular passage doesn't come up in any Christian discourse or debates or anything like that until Eusebius uses it. Now, Eusebius is much, much later in the Christian evolution. Before Eusebius, you had Origen, who was a major church father in the early church. He had Josephus's writings, and he never mentioned this particular part. So I would say the probability that it didn't exist is much higher than the probability that some kind of secular version actually existed. And anybody that tells you that there are secular versions out there that exist in different languages, all of those versions can be traced back to Eusebius's version. Also, if you actually just look at the Josephine passage, it doesn't flow with the rest of the information around it. You have Josephus talking about, Pilate killing a whole bunch of Jews, and then it's like, oh, there's this miraculous, commercial for Jesus, and then he starts talking about another sad calamity. Well, the previous paragraph, it wasn't a sad calamity. It was like this joyful, awesome thing. It was an awesome advert for Jesus. So why does it seem to be sad? It shouldn't be sad. This is actually referencing the paragraph before the Testimonium Flavianum, because that was actually very sad, like a sad calamity. So the Testimonium Flavianum actually breaks up the flow that Josephus normally goes with. A lot of Jesus historicists will say that, well, Josephus has a lot of patchwork in his work. So all in all, the Testimonium Flavianum just doesn't make sense. And then there's another passage later on that talks about the brother of Christ being James or whatnot. There's actual good reason to think that this is referencing a completely different Jesus, as Jesus was a popular name at the time. So you would think that you would need to be able to discern this Jesus from any other Jesus that existed. For one thing, the way that James dies in that particular part of Josephus doesn't match anything that we actually know about Jesus. And also the brother of Christ, whatever, that part actually reads as like more of a marginal note rather than something that was actually written in there. So it makes more sense that this is an interpolation and that this Jesus is some other Jesus that's being referenced. In fact, Josephus actually mentions other Jesuses before this point. Now, there are a lot more sources that I could go through here, but just to give you a brief overview of all of them, none of them actually have first-hand accounts in them. They are either just mentioning Christians or they're just mentioning what Christians believe, like with Pliny the Younger and Tacitus. It was already established by the 2nd century that Pilate supposedly persecuted Christ and crucified him on the cross, because this was already in the Gospels. So it doesn't make sense that writers or historians in the 2nd century saying these things would prove that those things actually happened more than 70 years before that. It just doesn't make sense.
I go through mountains and mountains of evidence only to have them say at the end, well, that doesn't really count. That's not really evidence. You still don't have any proof that God exists, and you certainly don't have any proof that Jesus is God. Well, the first time I heard that, it was pretty stunning. I was actually stunned into silence. I didn't know what to say to that, because whenever you're speaking with somebody, you show them evidence, naturally you think that they're actually going to look at the evidence and find out for sure for themselves, like millions and actually billions of other people have done, that it actually does exist. But an atheist will just sort of brush it all aside and say that it doesn't really count.
That's because they don't count for the reasons I've just given you.
Well, I came on the one question that all atheists fear and no atheist can answer by accident. Because one day I was so flustered I said, okay, show me the evidence you have to prove that God does not exist. And I got an answer like this. It was a blank stare. They don't have evidence that God doesn't exist. None. They never have.
That's because you can't prove a negative. That's like saying that you have no money, and I say, show me that you have no money. Well, there's no money to show, so...
And the very thing they accuse Christians of having, which is blind faith, turns out is exactly what atheists have. They have no evidence to support their position. They have no evidence to support that God doesn't exist. So they live with a blind faith that God doesn't exist.
Wrong. We don't have blind faith. There is no evidence for the reasons I've said, which people have countlessly I've gone over before.
I thought that was interesting and a little bit poetic.
Of course you would, because you don't know how shit works. That's it for this video. Take us out, GE.
So, heathens, I hope that you like this very long-winded explanation of just the overview of mythicism. And if you did, please come to my channel, subscribe, and I guess I'll see you heathens there. Frustrated Atheist, I really appreciate it. I will see you soon. And for the rest of you heathens, don't forget to stand up and use your voice. Bye, y'all!
Godless Engineer's clip was a lot longer, so make sure you go to his channel and check out the full one that he'll have up soon. And remember, stay frustrated, everyone.